I believe that a lot of folks make you feel like, oh, if you're ambitious or, you want to be in politics, all these things, you have to become a horrible person. And I really hope that we're starting to define this new standard, or maybe revisit an old one that existed before, of representation that comes with humanity, and these things are not mutually exclusive.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. Welcome to the What You Don't Hear podcast. This is a life podcast. It's a story podcast. It's a bit of an open journal dive into people's lives as I sit and I uncover the real story behind my guest journey, finding out what makes them who they are and all that they do, digging into the parts of their story that we otherwise wouldn't get to hear. I am your host. My name is Ross Tyson. I'm a creative of many kinds, a self-employed maker of many things. And as you probably guessed, one of those things I do is, of course, podcasting, as I bring you a couple different shows at this point. But this one right here, I bring you every other Monday, as well as most Fridays for those 15-minute Friday episodes. And thankfully, I'm able to create this show and those 15-minute Fridays and all the other shows now living on my own podcast network, not only thanks to you wonderful, wonderful people who are listening and watching, but there's some other amazing supporters of myself and this show, those of which I'm going to tell you about right now, so you can go and support them if you see fit, or who knows, maybe they in turn actually support you in some way as well. First, we are supported by the wonderful folks over at River and Rich. So if you've ever been down in the Franklinton area, you're over at 400 West, you're at Land Grant, Chrome Edge, something like that, you've probably noticed that strip of buildings across the street that houses things like Maker Social, One Line, Roy G. Biv, and the brand new Franklinton Market. Well, that is River and Rich, and they're making space in Franklinton for it to somehow get even cooler. So River and Rich brings together quality apartments, desirable amenities, all within a vibrant artistic community that surrounds it. Located in Franklinton, they offer 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and townhouse-style apartments with open floor plans, rad oversized windows, that sometimes is a must, and those awesome modern finishes as well. The amenities include a huge 24/7 gym, a heated pool, a fully stocked coffee bar, a secure package delivery room, pretty much everything you need to love the place that you live. And it doesn't just stop at the building. River and Rich embraces and connects with the art-filled Franklinton community that surrounds it. They hang up local art and murals featured all throughout the community. River and Rich is both a place to go home to, but it's also becoming a bit of living art itself. So if that type of living environment sounds like the one that you want to be at, well, of course, you can. So go check it out. They offer both guided and self-guided tours, so go view an apartment at any time. You can visit their website at riverandrichcolumbus.com for more information. Also, check this out. Because you listen to this podcast, I might be able to help you get a freaking apartment, y'all, because right now, new applicants can receive up to half off their security deposit if you use the code WYDH pod. So again, for more information, please contact River and Rich. Certain restrictions might apply. Hop to riverandrichcolumbus.com to get things going and go join the colorful life over at River and Rich. We are also supported by our friends over at Promo West Productions. Promo West is one of the lead concert promoters, not just here in Ohio, but a couple different places. But right now, I'm going to tell you about some Ohio concerts. So if you're interested in catching a live show, I would assume, if you're an avid listener of this show, then you know what's coming, and you know to pay attention to the following list, because maybe you'll want to check out one of these upcoming concerts brought to you by Promo West. They've got Young the Giant with Milky Chance at Kemba Live Outdoors on Saturday, June 17th. That one's right around the corner. Then Between the Buried and Me at Newport on June 29th. Metric also at Newport Music Hall on Friday, June 30th. And then Scott Bradley's Postmodern Jukebox at Newport Music Hall on July 2nd. So if you want to grab tickets to any of those shows, you can just jump over to axs.com, or as always, for more information on these or any other upcoming concerts, if you want to find out who's coming to town and when, you can find all the info you need at promowestlive.com. So let's get to this week's conversation and my next guest, because this guest was one that I was hoping to talk to, I don't know, from the pretty early days of me doing this show. This week, I have a conversation with Morgan Harper. So if you're from Ohio, that name might sound familiar. She is a political candidate here in Ohio, but of course, she is so much more than that as we dig into all of that here in this episode. Now, I'm not personally super delved into the political world. I'm not, I can admit that. So I was honestly very excited to have Morgan on the show, not just to get to know her, but to also get to know how she's navigated that world, and as well kind of get a little bit of a peek behind the curtain into how all that stuff runs and what really goes into it. Morgan is easily one of my favorite guests that I've ever had on the show, and I still sit here sort of shocked that I got to sit down with her, to be honest. I don't know. She's just out there standing up for the right things, in my opinion, advocating for the community and those around her, building something great, and is honestly it's just badass to me that I got to sit down and actually sit down one-on-one with her and get to know her and her story in this way. But we dig into it all, her full story here on the show, told in a way that I don't quite think that she has shared before. So without putting it off any longer, let's dive in. This is episode 86 and my conversation with the wonderful Morgan Harper. Are you ready to make a podcast to get to know each other? Let's make this happen. Morgan, thank you so much for being down to do this.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I was very, very stoked that you were down for this. I'm glad we got to align schedules and make this happen.
Oh my gosh. Never an easy feat, but yeah.
It really isn't. Yes. And there's so many times, especially when we're meeting for the very first time, it's hey, I know you're super busy and also I've got these things going on. So trying to align schedules in that way is always a challenge, but one that we accomplished.
We're here.
So I'm stoked that we're here.
I'm happy to be here.
I am very, very excited to get to know you because, full disclosure, most of the time when I have a guest on that I don't personally already know, I usually tend to only know the surface level of what they do. And I don't do a full detective dive into everything about them because I like to obviously find that out real time while we talk about it all. So honestly, even just to start off, lay it out for me, what all are you involved in? Because I feel again, I only know a little bit of the surface.
What am I involved in? So, and it's a common question I get. People are Morgan, what are you doing? Yeah. And the implicit question there is are you okay? You've lost things that you've run for. And it's I'm okay. I'm good. And now I work to earn money. So because I'm often not working when I'm running for office or when I've been running for office. So I currently work for a think tank that is based in Washington. It's called American Economic Liberties Project that focuses on economic policy, competition policy issues. And I'm the director of policy and advocacy. So that's my day job. Gives me health insurance. We like health insurance. That's good. So that keeps me pretty busy. I also do some legal stuff on the side for a plaintiff side firm that represents women who have been sex trafficked, sexually abused. And so that's part of what I'm up to. And then we have the whole political universe of things. So I co-founded a grassroots nonprofit called Columbus Stand Up. We do a lot of different things when there's active elections going on. We run a rideshare program to help get people to vote. That started during the pandemic when there was so much going on with that transportation life that we still are in some ways dealing with. And then we also just do a lot of voter education. And so right now, I would say we're very focused on the local elections that are coming up here in Columbus, and May will be the primary. So getting folks organized for that and making sure that people have full information before they go to the ballot.
Yeah. Okay. So
just
a couple things of a little bit of importance. So a gigantic list like I kind of thought we were going to dive into. Now, what I am so interested in, because we can dive into each thing, but I really want to get into how did all of this start for you? And you can jump into whichever side, either hey, I was interested in politics because of this, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Honestly, just take me back to the beginning. Did you
the beginning? Which beginning? The Morgan 6 years old beginning?
That's what we're looking.
Okay.
That's what we're looking is. Where does the interest in any of this even begin to pop up? Was this something that were you like raised in like this environment at all? Did you have anybody that you looked up to in that way? Like, how does it start?
Yeah. Well, no, not raised in a political environment. If you talk to my mother now, she would probably be like, why do you have to do all of this? You know, she's not a very political person. I think for me, though, I did have these very formative experiences when I was really young that just took me out of my bubble. We all are born into a bubble. We all have our home environment that we're born into. Some of us get to stay in that bubble for more prolonged periods of time. I had what I would now call a gift. I think at the time I might have had different adjectives for it, but you know, I had the real gift opportunity to get out of that. And I was just placed in these different environments that showed me what my home bubble was, how unrepresentative it was in certain aspects, and also some of the inequities in our society, in our city, in our state, and then eventually our country. But when I was still just very young, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, for me, it woke me up to the fact that it's not cool that I'm going to get access to opportunity that other people might not. And the only reason why that would be the case is luck or just the chance of where you're born. That had a very fundamental impact on me. And I think, you know, especially being someone, and I've talked a lot about this during the campaigns, I'm always conscious of being, repeating myself because some people have heard so much about different parts of my story. But when you're adopted, and I do try to emphasize a lot that I'm adopted because I feel like people who are adopted, the stories don't get out there enough about what that experience is like, but it does embed in you this sense that you're entitled to virtually nothing. Your story that you're told is someone gave you up and someone took you, and everything from there, you should just be grateful that that happened. And there's some elements to that are true and positive, right? There's some other negative things that maybe we could unpack, but for me, it really did give me this feeling of, I'm not entitled to anything. I just was left to chance from the very beginning. And so the fact that I've been able to be in a position to use some of my God-given or whatever entity you would ascribe it to talent, that's just unbelievable. And I want to make sure that everybody gets that same chance. And what will it take to get there? And so I've been on a journey to figure out what that would take, given how divided, segregated opportunity can be in our city, in our state, in our country, to figure out how to make that right.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. And there's so much that I want to dive into there. So let's first kind of dig into what was it that, like you said, you were like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. What was it at that point in time that you were identifying at that young of age that you were like, okay, wait, hold on, I'm noticing some differences here.
Right.
That even as a child, I can identify as, wait, I don't know if this is like cool necessarily that it's this way. What were those things like?
There's some key moments I would point to, and I think about them a lot because especially when you're pursuing a career that maybe is a little unorthodox, you think about moments, why am I doing this? What led me to this point? Right. One critical moment for me was when I was probably 5 or 6 years old. And I don't know if I've talked about this much before, but so I grew up near James and Livingston on the east side of Columbus. We went to Barnett Recreation Center. I don't know if you're from Columbus.
So not originally.
Okay.
No. Yeah.
I don't know how deep I'm getting into the Columbus knowledge, but Barnett's still there, so it's still a thing. Okay. The Recreation Center. And when I was really young, I wanted to be a ballerina. Maybe every little girl wants to be a ballerina when she's really young, right? And so I was taking first ballet class at Barnett Recreation Center, which was just down the street from my family where I grew up, and I loved it. I maybe got through 2 classes. And then after that second or third class, I was leaving with my mom, and there was a couple leaving I don't know how old, probably in their 30s. At the time they seemed older, but I was very young then. And then, they're leaving, and then this group of teenagers came up and just started beating the shit out of the guy that was part of the couple. And from that point on, it was the first time I'd ever seen violence directly, and physical violence in that way. And then from that point on, my mom was like, okay, we're done. Ballet's over. We're not going back here. It's over, because I'm not going to have you in an unsafe situation. And that had been one of the pillars for me of our community up until that point. Halloween costume parties that would happen in the gym, different classes that we would take. And so that stuck with me. This community asset, now I have more of the vocabulary that would go along with these things, community asset that I connected with, that connected us as a community, was going to be removed from my personal community experience because of safety. And that's problematic. And I don't know what to make of that. I don't know what to make of this beating that has happened in front of us, but that struck me as there's something off about that. And that really began my observation of the lack, the fleeing of resources from that area. And even though, I grew up in Berwick, which has always been and maintains, a pretty middle-class community, everything around it that you have to access, Berwick is just residential, but everything around that you have to leave to get into commercial areas just slowly started decaying in front of our eyes as children. And then culminated with the experience of being 9, 10 years old. And my mom had made the decision that Columbus City Schools was one of those institutions that was decaying, and we needed to make sure that we could get out of there as well. And we couldn't afford to move to a suburb, which is what most people were doing in that situation. So we need to figure out another plan. And eventually I got a scholarship to go to Columbus Academy, which was in Gahanna. And that woke me up to how all of this decaying of community and the resources and the lack of always having to go somewhere to get something also tied to education, which is the fundamental promise of what this country is about. And if that's the case, well, then something's deeply, deeply off about this whole American dream and all the promises that are made to us. And I'm not going to stand for that. So, I was very young, and I wouldn't have been able to articulate any of this at the time in this way, but that just got me paying very close attention to what was happening around me.
Yeah. So as you're growing up, again, being very young, I guess maybe the question is how are you navigating those things? How are you being attentive of those things? Because obviously you can't just start the next day and be like, okay, I'm going to become a political candidate in a week, and I'm going to do this, and I'm just a child. And I think even at that point in time, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but as a kid, we usually can't articulate our thoughts and feelings to the adults around us in a way that even if we are presenting it how we see it is oh no, I'm really explaining it well. They're probably, you're a kid, right? We're a kid. They're like, oh yeah, okay, cool. It's world is changing. Okay, whatever. So how are you do you remember, was it just something that it sort of just was ingrained in you from that moment and you were like, okay, one day I'm going to do something about this? Or are you even changing the way you're kind of, this question sounds way deeper than what I really mean it to be, but the best way I can ask it is were you changing the way you were navigating childhood at that point in time, or even into teenage years and stuff like that? Or
well, if you talk to my friends who have known me since I was 10 years old, I don't think that they would ever say that I was a totally normal kid. So I always have been pretty focused in that way, very focused on service, change. And for to get to your first question, how did that manifest? Well, it manifested for me in doing whatever I thought I could as an individual to close this gap. What can I do as an individual? Well, the thing that we're taught is service, volunteering. So I remember when I was in 5th grade, we would do these can drives to send food to folks who were in need in different parts of the city from our private school. And I was like, okay, we're not just going to do a can drive. We need to make sure we get as many cans as possible, right? And really pushing a lot of my classmates who were pretty affluent, who had no familiarity with struggle, to care. It's we got to get out of here. This is not what most people are living like in our city, and you need to know that so that we can do something about it. So getting very involved, actually helping to form later in high school our community service board that started to give people guidance on how to fulfill their community service requirements, all of these things that we have. And I would say, the connection to much later, all the political stuff is, I just started to see the limitations of that. It's me as one person, I can badger my classmates till the cows come home. I can give a junior speech, excuse me, about, the obligation that we have as what was then starting to be called millennial generation to really care and contribute to society. But that's not enough. There are there are decisions being made for us that individual acts of service will never solve the impacts of those decisions. And I got to figure out what's going on there.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm also asking this because I remember, when I'm growing up in my small, like southeastern Ohio town, like a very small town, I always had a feeling that I didn't really belong there, that I always kind of wanted to do something else, but I didn't really know what to do with that. Like I wasn't able to like really put that into motion and take action until like after high school, when I was like, oh, I want to do like creative things with life, and I guess I'm just going to go try.
Right.
So was there ever, like, the reason I preface that is like, was there a part of you, like, what was your balance of, hey, I'm finding a community, or I'm helping build a community. I'm kind of inserting myself into these communities to help. Or was there ever another part of you that was like, do I feel like I'm the only one thinking of these things? And did you ever feel like you were kind of like alone in that aspect growing up? Or did you just see the community element and you were like, oh, cool, this is where I can put these thoughts into action with?
Well, I should say, and it's interesting. Before we started this, I was having a meal with someone, and we were talking. We had similar experiences in a way, because we both got the opportunity to go to very good private schools here in Central Ohio. And we were one of the, if not the only, and I know in my class at Columbus Academy when I started, I was the only girl of color, woman of color, whatever we call it now, black girl, and the person I was just talking to similarly. And so I had two existences. I had home community that was the east side of Columbus, and then you enter this other context, right? And so I do think that duality of experiences going back and forth as a child does make you more alert, I would say. But I mentioned this, the home community was one that service was a value, right? I mean, I was part of a community. It was the east side of Columbus. There were a lot of people that looked out for us. The house I grew up in, my neighbors were consistent for pretty much my entire childhood. Neighbor that lived across the street was a nurse for the public health department. One of the first people to advocate to do anything for people who had STDs, was very serious about making sure that we were doing something to look after people who had AIDS. I mean, this was just in our neighborhood. We had a person who worked for the post office, a guy that picked up trash, that would always make sure that my mom got help in getting rid of any big pieces of garbage that she wasn't able to dispose of herself. So that was the context in which I was raised, and then entered a different environment where I saw that service wasn't necessarily a value that everybody was brought up in as well. So I don't want to minimize that. I had strong role models around me that really showed me the only way we get ahead is together. And I think in some ways, and maybe I will be after this for the rest of my life, the goal is to replicate that feeling of belonging, of community, of the value of looking out for each other, which I do think is quite prevalent in Columbus. But so many people now are under so much stress that it's hard to be available for each other in that same way. But that's something, I had the vision of what I think is the building block of stability, right, from my early life experiences. And that was the fear, actually, and then observing that decay, because it's like, wait a second, this is all we've got, right, is being able to connect with each other, have access to these resources, shared resources. And if that's going away, that's a problem. So what was your original question? I don't know if I lost track of it.
No, I think you really did answer. It was that kind of duality you were speaking of like, were you either finding yourself more alone and thinking all these things, or you were identifying there are communities you can place yourself within to be like, okay, I can express these things?
Yeah, but I think once I got into the private school environment, I did feel a little bit as I was an outsider. I was an outsider economically. I was an outsider racially. The school was just becoming co-ed, so gender was also a very heightened issue at the time. But I think the economic isolation of just not having a ton of money to spend on everything really had an impact on me. And even more so, or better put, being around people that did seem like they had access to almost infinite resources, and recognizing how different that was from the average person's existence just made me want to level things out a bit. Right.
Okay, so before we continue down the timeline, I do want to stick in the early years a little bit, because you mentioned earlier the feelings that can come with being adopted. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming you were adopted,
yes.
Right? That's why. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't want to just like trail off into this. And you're like, no, I just brought that up as an example.
Yeah. Hypothetical. No,
yeah.
Real story.
Situation.
Yeah.
So have you been able, like looking back now, because I've had some conversations with friends and stuff like that about, you know, things like this and the way that they feel and like the challenges they feel like they almost put up themselves, based off of feelings that comes from being adopted. Did you ever identify any of those? Were any of those ever like barricades that popped up for you at any point in time? Or
Feelings
of does being adopted bring any of those negative feelings? Like we were talking about earlier of like, oh, I was given up or I was abandoned or whatever that we can tell ourselves in our minds when we're dealing with something like that.
Yeah.
Did any of that ever pop up for you? Or even in hindsight now looking back, like, can you identify, oh, you know what, during this time frame, I think I was looking for community in this way or looking to help others in this way, and I didn't know it was because deep down I was feeling this. Like, did anything like that ever?
You know, I don't know about feelings of abandonment. I was really fortunate that I was just placed with my mother was so motherly, you know, and my brother's also adopted. And so I think a lot of times people will feel alienated a bit if they have siblings who are genetically related to their parents. I didn't have that, but I do think, and like I was referencing before, I do think there's something about the insecurity that you might feel that your station isn't guaranteed, that things could change overnight. I think, you know, some of that relates to adoption. Some of that relates to, you know, some family stuff we went through with divorce and change of financial circumstances, where it's just, you never know what's coming and you're always a little bit on edge. And so, yeah, I do think there's part of that. And then the real perfectionism. I mean, for a lot of my younger life, I was very stressed about being high achieving, making sure my grades are always perfect. If I, you know, in elementary school, we didn't have ABC, it was excellent, good, something. And I was like, how could I be getting a good? You know, it's just crazy, but it's putting such high standards on myself because it felt like, no, I have to be fantastic. And it's hard to know how much of this connects to different parts of your story, but that has definitely been an element of my personality for a long time. And I remember it wasn't until I got to high school where it really felt like that pressure was almost crushing me in a way. And my mom said to me, she's like, you know, you could be perfect or you could be happy, and you've got to decide what you're going to be. And I was like, yeah, okay. I'd rather be happy. This is a lot, you know? Yeah. And it's a process, of course, but that's always been a running theme for sure, especially in my younger childhood, putting a lot of pressure on myself.
Mom coming in clutch with that advice right there.
Good, right?
That is incredible advice. Especially, I also feel like to be sharing with your teenager, because not that like every parent is like super pushy or something on a teenager, but I think in those years, that's when it's like, okay, we have to start to decide what are we going to do with adulthood and what's school look like or what's our workforce look like and all that sort of stuff. And it can just kind of be, hey, I'm here to support you, right? In you know, some cases, but also go,
right?
You're becoming an adult, so go. So to be able to slow down and be like, hey, this perfectionist thing is cool. We can want to highly achieve, but also let's just make sure you're happy.
Right.
I think especially during that like time frame in all of our lives, that is almost, and this is a big statement, but I almost feel like that's sometimes when for some of us, the pursuit of what our pure happiness can look like starts to slowly get pushed down. And I think, like, I say that because a lot, you know, just from experience and just having had these types of conversations with so many different people, when you enter adulthood, right, we're graduating high school, we're either deciding to go to college or we're not, and we're choosing what we're about to do. I think we can easily go from 0 to 100 in attachment of what our new identity is, right? If we're just like, okay, I am now this, and I work this job, or now I'm going to school for this, and that's all I can do.
Right.
And even if we don't love it, we still put so much pressure on ourselves to achieve and to be like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. And I think that starts to slowly, it doesn't immediately push it all the way down, but I think that's like almost the first domino in a domino effect of beginning to somewhat bury the hopes, the dreams, the happiness in ways, right?
Right.
And I don't know if you're familiar with like the idea of the buried life, or if you remember that show on MTV a few years ago.
No.
So it's
how many years ago?
So
I don't think I know that show. My MTV knowledge is a little dated.
So 2012, 13.
Okay, definitely after I stopped watching MTV.
Okay. But like the idea of the show is basically like chasing a bucket list, right? And reframing what the idea of a bucket list is, and to instead sit on your deathbed and be like, oh, I regret not doing all of these things. It's like, okay, well, let's not let those dreams get buried.
Right.
And so that's the idea. It's like not about being buried when you're dead, but it's like, don't let those dreams and goals become buried.
Yeah.
And with that thought process, like, I feel like that is when that begins. And it's not even that we necessarily, I sometimes think, we're not even consciously burying those things. We're not actively deciding, you know what, I wanted to do this, but I'm absolutely not, and I don't care about it anymore.
Right.
And I'm just going to start tucking it away.
Yeah.
Life starts to get in the way, and things that we can see as more prominent needs and wants and all that sort of stuff pop up. So then effectively those dreams, those goals become a part of our buried life, right? And we sit on our deathbed and we're like, I wish I would have, I'm not worried about the things I did do. I'm more worried about the things that I didn't do.
Yeah.
And
that's always been a big fear of mine, actually.
Yeah. Has it really?
Yeah, because you don't want regret, right? And I think for me, and I don't know why it is, but I've always just, and it probably is connected to knowing I had a parent that was backing that independent thinking up. I've always just done what I thought was best for me, and maybe not always aspire to that, but yeah, I mean, back to earlier years is, college decisions. Mom was not involved in that. She's like, let me know. And maybe it's because she saw my, putting so much pressure on myself. Let me know what you decide. Whatever you decide will be great. Right. Okay. No, I don't know if that's the best approach, but for me, it was, look, I could go this route that I'm on that is Ivy and this, and you got into these places, so you have to go. And I felt like, I think if I repeat this environment that I just went through, I may have a nervous breakdown and I need to pause. I need to be around some different types of people and kind of focus on myself. And that was a big decision for me, because you're right. I think especially in your teenage years, you have the pressure of doing whatever everyone thinks you should be doing. And I don't know why. I was in touch with what I felt like I needed for me to be okay. And it was going my own route. And so, and I've just kept that pattern up pretty consistently since then, I would say.
Yeah. You honestly pretty much answered the next question that I had, because I took that little side quest to kind of come back to the, like, what was that decision-making process like for you as you're like graduating high school and then entering the world of, like, did you go to college and that sort of stuff?
I went to college. I went to Tufts in Boston.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what was that decision-making process like for you? Because obviously we've got supportive moms sitting there and saying, hey, make sure you're making decisions for you that are going to allow you to be happy. What was like the lead thought in your mind at that time? Was it still like, hey, I'm still into this whole like community thing? And was that the beginning of like, how do I begin to involve myself in deeper, more organized community things or politics or whatever? Or what was that first step into?
Still
that?
Not near politics. Yeah, I was very leery of politics and politicians. So that was not something that I thought would be my thing. I was very focused on community work, though. So I actually chose Tufts because I got a scholarship that was from their new civic education school that they had started. They pay off debt, always trying to stay debt free if I can. Yeah. And they let you, they were saying that they would give you money in addition to paying off some of your debt to launch your own community project. And I really did feel like this community thing for me isn't just a college service requirement or to be able to graduate from high school. It's not just a fad. I actually think this may be my entire thing, but I don't know. Everyone says as you get older, you change. Maybe you'll just care about money, whatever. So I had that in the back of my head, but I really felt like, no, this is my thing. I don't care as much about anything, but trying to figure out how to make sure everybody has as much opportunity as I got. And so, but I wanted to choose a place that felt like it would allow me to stay true to my values. That was a priority, because you get into certain environments and the peer pressure it's a different standard. The standards that they're operating by, how they're measuring success are different. I chose Tufts because of that scholarship. And also I got there and I could just tell these are free thinkers. People are kind of doing whatever they want. They are who they are. And that's what I felt like, that was the life skill I really needed after the environment I had come out of that was very structured, pretty conservative in certain ways. And I wanted to be free. Freedom is a a top priority for me.
Yeah.
And I want it for all of us.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm actually interested, like when you say that, is it like the idea of being able to freely build like the type of life that we want to have? Because like when I hear that, that's what I get from it, because that's what I relate to, because that for so long now has always been my answer to anyone when they're like, so why are you doing all the things you're doing?
Right.
Because I do like 100 different things, right? Like,
yeah. What's on your list?
Like I'm a video director, I'm a photographer, I'm a graphic designer, podcaster, storyteller, all that sort of stuff. Do social media management. Like if you look up the term freelancer, anything that can be listed under, it's pretty much what I do, right? Because I do love getting to kind of flex some creative muscles in any different avenue possible. I've never been just like, I want to lock into this thing, that's what I am. I'm like, well, I would love to tell a story in this way, and in that way, and in that way, and whatever it may be. So over the years, like what has often popped up in conversation is, okay, so like it's cool that you do all this stuff, but like what's like the goal, right? Do you want to be like the next most awesome film director and have all the money in the world? Or are you trying to like start a creative agency and do like, what is it? And like, I've often felt strange because my answer is so simple. My answer has always been, I just want, and like I've literally said this on past podcasts, like my answer has always been, I just want freedom. I want the freedom to do or pursue or not pursue anything that I want. If I like, and I identified early on that I was like, okay, I'm not made for like the normal job setting. Like I'm just
it's not you.
No.
Yeah.
And I know no one likes working, right? Everyone, but like most of the time.
Some people can handle it more than others. Yeah.
But it's like, it's the cliche to say like, oh, I gotta go to work, blah, 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 right? But for me, it was like, I literally was like, I don't know what it is, but I don't belong here. This is not what I'm supposed to be doing. Right. And so for me, that turned into okay, I need to do whatever amount of work that I can to build a foundation for my life, to have just sort of an open area, right? I built the foundation, cool, sky is the limit sort of thing, right? Where it's like, if you want to wake up today and go and try this thing, you can. Yeah. And so that has always been my answer. So another side quest of mine, to get back to the original question of, when you say that freedom of life, is that kind of what you're describing, or what does that look like to you and for others that you want to help shape? Yeah,
sort of. I mean, you've described your personal definition of freedom, and I think everybody has some version of it for themselves. What deeply disturbs me about society and what motivates me to do all of this political stuff is that not everyone's in a position to understand what's going on around them and then also personally define freedom for themselves, right? Yeah. And that's a problem. We have a lot of people that are getting pushed into certain directions and they just have to take it, and maybe take it for their entire lives. And not to bring everything to a policy discussion, but I do that. One thing that is floating around right now that's a very live policy issue is, non-compete agreements. It's like a very concrete employment thing that we've somehow gotten to this point where employers impose these non-compete agreements and contracts, whether you're a wage worker or some senior executive saying you can't leave when you want to leave and go work for another company if it's in the same industry. That's crazy. And now we actually have, some people in Washington are like, no, we might just ban these and free perhaps upwards of 60 million Americans who are subject to these things. So that's not freedom to me. It's not freedom to me that you just happen to be born in Columbus and you go to a high school that's trying to breed you to be a worker for the rest of your life and have no control over your life. That is not freedom. And I want us all to be free, and we're not there yet. And so for me, my personal freedom is that I am in a position to use my talent creatively, I would say, to not feel that I only am doing things to earn money, that we need some amount of money to exist, as described at the beginning of the conversation, and really feel like there is some level of control and ability to make our own decisions for ourselves as we define them. But what that vision is for what your own freedom looks like, well, no one can totally answer that for you. But we got some basic things that need to be put into place so that you get in that position to even have the bandwidth to think about it. You know?
How can people, or even in your opinion, what is it that you think prevents a lot of people from or just like a lot of us from having that bandwidth in general? Is it just that life begins, like we were talking about, it's like we jump into workforce or college or whatever it is. Sometimes we're forced, sometimes that we think that that's just the decision, that the only one that we can make.
Yeah.
Is it just like the blinders pop up and it's like, okay, time to just start living life,
right?
And not really for me, but just as is, right? Yeah. What do you think that is for us that like often puts those blinders up?
Yeah, I think it depends. In some ways what you're describing, I think it can be a little bit, you just get into the motion of life and what a lot of people around you are doing. I will say though, that's one of the exciting things about right now is, that you can decide you're going to be a freelancer and put together an amalgamation of different things that you can do, and that is a possibility, and that will support you to do what you want. I don't think that's always been the case. That's what, when I talk to young people, I was like, oh, Morgan, you're looking for career advice or this. is like, you all have the internet. That's amazing. The internet was just starting to be a thing when I was really finishing high school, being in college. LinkedIn, you can look up what any person in the world is doing when it comes to a career and just randomly message them and see if they'll help you. So that's a key tool in all of this. But, in terms of, so I do think in many cases in prior generations, it was a lack of information, a lack of understanding of options. And then the world just hadn't caught up with being a little bit more flexible and having the ability for people to pursue different ideas. But I'm also describing some structural barriers that allow certain people to be in a position to, explore what their creativity is and all of that, and others that are kind of behind the 8 ball all the time. And that's what, I spend a lot of policy time focusing on. How do we change or eliminate some of those structural barriers to make sure that, we all get to that position of being able to define freedom for ourselves.
Yeah. So when you're going through college and everything, like, is this kind of already in your mind of like, these are the things that I want to be focusing on and kind of navigating towards? Or walk me through that time frame.
So very focused on community service still, but in the back of my head, just feeling like this isn't really doing enough. It's not getting at the root causes. I've always been really into how do we get to the root cause? What's really going to be the solution? And then I ended up, I think it was my sophomore year, after my sophomore year of college, I stayed for the summer in Boston, and that's when I took a public policy class. I had heard about public policy through some other course. I never knew the term, which in retrospect, like, that's so strange that you didn't really know that term, but that's where I was. And it didn't fit with the schedule. So I was like, okay, but over the summer I can take this class that's just devoted to public policy. Let me take that. And that's when I really learned and made that connection to the idea that government, and again, it sounds so silly. It's like, of course, this is what the government's doing. Government is passing laws, but government is also designing public policy, and public policy determines all those level of resources that we experience at the community level. Because that was my memory of childhood. It feels like something's changing. I don't know why. I don't know what's driving all of this change, but I got to college and realized, oh, none of this is an accident. There are people in positions in government that are actually making the calls that determine the flow of resources that then impact little 6-year-olds like myself on the east side of Columbus. I got to become one of those people. And I don't know what that'll look like. I don't know what it will mean. I, at this point, am starting to realize there's some political connection here. I know nothing about politics, but I'm on the track, and I gotta continue to pursue this to figure out what's happening so that, I'll eventually be able to support Columbus and figuring this stuff out.
Yeah. So during that time, you were like sure that this was like, again, not so much the political side of things, but like this community driven, community focused. You were sure, you're like, this is if anything, this is my why. This is my thing, right?
Pretty sure, but definitely dealt with those factors and the peer. I don't even call it peer pressure because none of my friends were the mainstream, we need to make money type, but there were definitely forces around me. And again, even probably my own mother. It's like, you've worked so hard. Why don't you just go get a job and make a lot of money? And everything you do seems to be going in the opposite direction, and really trying to just stay true to the core. But it wasn't until, so after I finished college, I decided I wanted to go to Washington. I had the ability to do some corporate job that I didn't really care much about, but was going to pay me more than probably my mom was making at that time. And she was, in her 60 or a little over 60 probably. But I could have done that. I did the interview. I was like, God, I don't care about this at all. And then I got the chance to go to Washington. That felt like this is the hub of all this policymaking stuff. Yeah, it's a third of the amount of money. Yeah, I don't really know anyone there, but I'm just going to go for it and figure it out. And so, all along the way, there have always been these crossroads where it's this tug of like to do the thing that would be the life that almost people expect of me, because you can be in these positions to maybe get rich or whatever, with the doors that are opening to you, and then continuously deciding on committing to my why, and my why is community.
Now, I might be jumping ahead here a little bit, but was there, whether it's one of those kind of push and pull moments or something else, like, was there ever a moment where you were like even slightly like, you know what, like maybe I will go this way instead. I still really care about these things, but how can I maybe fulfill that in some other direction? Was there ever like almost a change of pace in any of that? Or were you like, once you were sure, you were like, I could do that, but this is my thing?
Yeah. After I finished law school, I came back to Columbus. I worked for a judge. I clerked for a federal judge downtown. And then I went to the law firm. And this was probably the last moment where if I was going to divert course in a big way, that would have been it.
Okay.
The law firm I worked for is called Cravath. It is considered one of the best corporate law firms in the entire world. They lay out the red carpet for you when you start as a summer associate. And then once you're associate, all of the messages are stay on this path and you will be rich. Just keep coming with us. And, maybe you'll never see your family again, but you'll be rich, right? So that was probably the last environment I opted into that even presented an option for me to go that route or to change course fundamentally from what I thought I wanted to devote my life to. And I stayed there for exactly 2 years, almost to the day, and it was a great experience in learning about how to work very efficiently under very extreme circumstances. But at the end of the day, I knew after a year, I was like, my heart's not in this, and I am not good at pretending for anyone who has interacted with me directly. And I was like, no, this just isn't it. This is somebody's dream. This is not my dream. Nice meals are good, but if I'm going to get them, I'm going to find another way to get them, because this will not be my way. This will not be my way.
It's honestly like, I love hearing you describe this, because it really is refreshing. Like, and these are the type of conversations I love to have, because I feel like in similar ways in different fields and all that sort of stuff, this is how I've thought and operated for such a long time. But it's like I had this inner pull towards the things I really wanted to do. And I was like going down that path, but I was sitting not being sure of that. I was sitting and kind of like feeling judgment and feeling like, wow, I'm an outcast. I'm an outsider. Why am I not like first the people that I go to school with? Why am I not like then my hometown? And then why am I not like, even when I moved to Columbus, I moved into a community because for a while I was working more in the music industry. I was, for sure there was way more of a music scene here than there was in my hometown. So for a minute there was like, oh, finally I'm around my type of people. Like, this is rad. But I still quickly found out I don't operate like they do. I don't think the way that they do. And it's not better than, it's just different than, right? And so for me, for years and years, and I would say up until just a handful of years ago, while I was pursuing all that I wanted to do, I was doing it with this like, yeah, you probably think I'm dumb for doing this. Or, oh, yeah, you probably. So it's like, it's refreshing to hear you share your story of, even though, there might have been a couple of those moments or something, you still followed that feeling of sureness, because that's what I did, even though I was battling such big like pushback, and there wasn't even directly pushback from anybody. It was just me.
It's sometimes into your head.
Exactly. Of just like, oh man, that person probably thinks I'm dumb for doing this. Oh no, but I'm still going to, because there's still this innate desire in me that is pushing me towards this thing. And I think only until the last handful of years did I really learn to articulate it or even accept it as, oh, this is my why. This is my purpose. And I think that even that changes and remolds itself, because for a while I was like, oh, my purpose is to create and tell stories in any form possible. Now I sit, having kind of remolded that and been like, wait, what's the real core of what I've loved doing with all of this? Whether it's being on a video set with a team of people or conversing with a client over what their marketing plan needs to look like and coming up with ideas for that, all the way to sitting with somebody that I don't know on a podcast and getting them to be willing to talk to me for an hour to 2 hours about their life. My core wasn't actually the creative tools that I was using. It was why I was doing it, which was to connect with people.
Yeah.
And so it took like chipping away at that, but still going down that path the entire time for me to officially kind of own, like, you know what? It is just the fact that I love to just connect with people over things. I love to just relate with people or collaborate with people on whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Because anybody can tell me just about any idea. I'm going to be like, that sounds rad. I can't give all my time to it.
Right.
But let's talk about it and how I would love to see you do it. How is that possible? Right. And I think just recently, like I said, did I really dive into that? Like, oh, I really do just love talking to people.
Yeah. And
I figured out how, like, what my version of helping people look like. Because it was disguised for a few years and perfectly fine. I say disguised, not necessarily a negative way.
Right.
But it was disguised to me as, oh, you're a creative and you do creative things. More so, I'm a human connector who does things in creative ways, and that's sort of what it is. So I say all that just to bring it back around and say that I love hearing your explanation of this stuff of, yes, there was probably multiple opportunities where you could have either, to lack of a better term, you could have settled for things or you could have went down a different path. But you were
sold out.
Yeah, right. But you were listening to that inner voice. And I think that is such an important thing that not a lot of us get to do, or sometimes we tend to ignore that inner voice.
Right.
Like, what's your opinion on the whole inner voice sort of thing? Like, do you think it's just so easy to ignore, or does it just go back to like, hey, life is crazy, it's easy just to kind of get caught in it? Or
well, one, I like the way you put about what your why is connection, because I think a lot of times people get caught up on a specific job or career or title. And I feel similarly. Like, I would say my why is really about community. Excuse me. We went to the Bengals game and I think I got a cold for being at the Bengals game. Yeah, it was very cold out there.
That's fair.
Anyway, so my why is community. Like what I was describing, like these people that made up my early life showed me what's possible. And I want that for everyone. I'm not passionate about politics. Politics is a means to an end to get people to have that feeling of community that's the building block of a stable life. That's what I'm passionate about, that end goal. Politics is a means to get there. And so inner voice, I mean, again, I don't know, maybe there's something off with me, but I feel kind of sick to my stomach when I know that I'm doing something that's not good for me. You get a little bit of that sunken feeling.
Yeah. Totally.
And I don't mean, I come from a place of privilege, I suppose, that I have been able to back out of those things when it isn't a good fit. And I know that not everyone necessarily, if you have children and you feel like you have to maintain a certain income to provide for your family, we're all dealing with different barriers or criteria or whatever, or factors that enable you to follow that voice. But I do think it's important that if you don't feel that, but I think we all have it, to reconnect with it, yeah. Because I can physically feel it when it's off.
Honestly, same. I really can. Like when I find myself, even on a simplistic level of, if I'm about to do freelance work with a client and we're in initial meetings and I just feel off about that relationship, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to dive into this because I'm not concerned with, like, even though it would be amazing to get your money for this project, I'm less concerned about getting that money and way more concerned about the expectations that we're setting, about how we communicate, and of course, how we connect. So that gut feeling is a very, very real thing.
It's big.
And again, not all of us are able to just like listen to that gut feeling, listen to that inner voice and say, oh, I will now make a decision based off of that, right? Like we not all of us can. But something else I've been like, I feel like learning and trying to not only live with, but also encourage anybody that I talk to live with when we're having that type of conversation, is the idea of fulfillment. And, it all circles back and connects to the why, the purpose, all that sort of stuff. And I think that sometimes, just like you were saying, most often we immediately attach to the job title. I am a this, right? And this is what I do. And I don't know necessarily if I can make time for anything else that I want to be or do or have outside of that. What I feel like where my head's been lately and what I've really settled into is this idea of fulfillment, and that, yes, we can be doing a thing that maybe we don't totally love. But I think our lack of love for that can kind of be cushioned by finding fulfillment in other ways to better serve that inner voice or that why that we have. And yes, it takes a process of slowing down. Maybe you're really talking to yourself of like, what is it that I love?
Yeah.
Like, cool, I might like this job, this thing that I do at my job. But then taking the extra step and saying, well, why do I like it?
Right.
Is it the community part of I love being with my coworkers? Or is it that I get to produce this thing and then I love when a customer reacts this way? Or like digging into that part. And I still think that there are ways, and I would love your thoughts on this. And I don't even necessarily know what the question is.
We'll get there.
But like that idea of fulfillment and how I don't necessarily know if our fulfillment always comes from that all or nothing choice.
Right.
Because I think that's what we make it out to be. And I think we're often taught that that's the thing, right? Once you get rich, then you'll be happy and you'll be fulfilled, and then you're good, and then you can live the life you want to live.
Right.
I think there's ways for a lot of us to live more versions of the life that we want to live within, reason or whatever that may be. But I think a lot of it is based off of where are you getting your energy from? Because we can identify that, yes, maybe this one big thing that takes up most of my time, space, and energy, it's taken a lot from me. Yeah. But are there smaller ways, in incremental ways, that we can be adding to that? Is it family time? Is it community time? Is it volunteering? Or is it just being creative and making time to once a week paint something? You know? So I guess maybe like, what are your thoughts on that fulfillment idea? Like, does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Or like,
no, that does make sense. I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, one of my thoughts is that I learned early on, and I think this was another gift that the private school environment gave me, is money does not equate to happiness. Some of the most miserable people I've met my whole life have the most money. And to see people that miserable with that much money when you're very young just shows you, it's like, oh, that will not be enough. We got to figure out something else, right? Because clearly that's not a direct correlation. But the other thing I was thinking when I was listening to you, because I would hate for the interpretation of anything, we're saying to suggest that every moment is just, unicorns and rainbows, right? In any experience. There have been a lot of experiences that I've had where the journey, even within that experience that feels like is getting you to the fulfillment goal, isn't fun. I mean, a couple of examples. The first job I worked in Washington was at the Federal Trade Commission. It was god awful. I hated it. I quit after 3 months. I was sexually harassed. I did not like the substance of the work that we were doing. I did not like how the agency was run. And I was so young, and I remember it was like the best part of every day, I would save up like 90 cents, because at that time Starbucks teas were maybe 90 cents, and to get a Starbucks tea just to get out of the building and clear my best part of my day. Not a good sign. Anyway, quit that. But it was a good title still, making not great, but still government, pretty good. Quit that. Started working at a think tank called Center for American Progress. And I was, essentially a secretary, an assistant to a woman who was one of the vice presidents there. And they told me, it's like, well, your job responsibilities are going to be, managing the calendar. And I was like, managing the calendar? It's like, I want to think deep policy thoughts, I'm just going to be managing the calendar. And it was that was my job, was managing the calendar, right? Because that's what everybody has to do. You got to get your foot in the door. And so, I would have days there, I'm just like, what am I doing? I work so hard for this. But the vibe of what was going on there was incredible. It was, you were getting paid to get an education about how policy got made, about how politics worked. I was surrounded by a lot of incredible women in particular, who are so smart and experienced in Washington. And it was amazing, but I had the day. So this was actually a pretty funny story. So my last day there, after a year of managing the calendar and kind of like waiting on hand and foot for my boss, who's a beautiful person, a lovely, nice, patient person. But I was still the underling. And, so every time, Morgan, give me a salad. Morgan, do this. Morgan, do this. It's like you're kind of a servant. And we get to the last day, and I get an email from her. She's like, Morgan, can you bring me my pashmina, the scarf? Yeah. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like even on my last day, I've got to go get the scarf. This is unbelievable. It's my last day, And then I take it down to the conference room, and it was all a ruse. She had actually gotten all of my closest friends from the organization there, this beautiful little cake, goodbye cake. And it was this whole party. She's like, surprise,
Wow.
And I just burst into tears. I couldn't handle it. I was like, oh my God, because in that moment, I don't think I even realized how much that experience in that place had meant to me until you see an expression of how much connection you have there, right? And there was a guy that was his first day, and he was like, wow, this must be a really special place to work, or she's crazy, So all to say, I still would preach, I suppose, the gospel of patience a little bit because, as long as the vibes are right, then probably things have a way of working out. That job put me in a position to get recommendations from people who allowed me to go on to law school and policy school, who helped me get future jobs after that. And we, have to be willing to ride the wave a little bit, even if we don't get the immediate level that we're looking for.
That delayed gratification is a gigantic thing that is like incredibly difficult to wait around for, and because you feel like it's just never gonna. You feel like there's no gratification that's gonna pop up,
right?
And I feel like I oddly learned early on, like instant gratification feels great, but it also doesn't usually lead to something sustainable.
No, and sometimes can be misleading. Honestly, an environment that's giving that to you right away might not, and more likely than not, in my experience, not be able to sustain that.
Right. So jumping back into the timeline, we left off at like the law firm.
Okay.
And you were making the decision to leave there.
Yeah.
Walk me through that. Like, is that another moment of Morgan being like sure about what she's doing and like, yes, you know what? This is the path. Right. I don't need this. Or was there okay, we're taking a leap here.
Yeah.
I think it's going to work because I know the work I'm about to put in.
Right.
But I'm really unsure. Like, walk me through that decision-making process.
Yeah. I don't know if you're into astrology. I don't know if I am either, but I'm a Cancer.
Okay.
And so I think we're naturally somewhat, if you believe in that, kind of emotional, nostalgic people. And it's tough with transitions, as maybe it's part of the makeup of this astrological sign, to the extent that means anything. I'm going to give all the qualifiers on that. But anyway, so all to say, with all transitions, I'm a little bit like, oh God, so emotional about it. Even a horrible law firm that really doesn't care about you at all. So yeah, I think I had a moment. It really felt like saying goodbye to a chapter, because in legal world, and especially in this firm culture world, the conventional wisdom would be you stay for 5 years to really keep all of your options open. You're leaving after 2. That means that you really don't think you're ever going to go back to a law firm. And so the fact that I left after 2 was like, this isn't for me. And some of the partners I worked with, they looked at me like, what are you doing? You're going to leave here and go be an underling in the Office of Regulations for some random new agency that started. Good luck, and make half as much money or whatever. And then some of them were just directly rude to me. It's like, we have nothing more to say to you. So I felt the close of that chapter, but I will say that it wasn't a chapter in the criteria that they use for success were not meaningful to me. And I was pretty clear that was not what I was after. So, the way that I ended up transitioning, I went to work at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was this new agency in Washington. It was saying it was data driven, trying to do government in a different way. All of the things that I believed were necessary to be able to get at that community level change that I had been thinking about, I was hearing from other people. And once I did an interview and I was like, all right, let me stress test this, because I'm skeptical of everybody, especially people who are in Washington. And I met with some folks and I was like, oh no, this is legit. These people are legit. And this is the kind of environment I need to be in. But just like we were talking about, so I got the job, long story short, I I went to lengths to get that job, showed up late. I left my bag in a taxi. I had to track it down in the middle of the night, with my suit. It was a whole very dramatic, but I got the job. And then you have that high of, oh, I'm going to be in this great environment where I do the policy making thing finally. And it's like, oh no, you're going to be a line level attorney in the Office of Regulations writing 600-page rules about arcane disclosure forms for prepaid debit cards. That's the reality of what that first step job is. And then you have the moment of like, oh man, maybe I made the wrong decision. Maybe I should just be making money at some law firm. This is a lot, but you have to stay connected to the why. And it's always like coming back to the culture, the people, the content of what's being discussed around you, even if you're not yet doing the exact version of it that you think you're destined to be doing, and being, up for that ride. That was my experience at the CFPB, because then within a year of being there, that's when I got promoted to be one of the director's advisors and in more of like finally a policy making role, which is what I had been working for since that sophomore year of college when I realized public policy was a thing.
Can we walk through what's going through your mind during that entire time frame? And I know you just sort of explained it a little bit, of like that battle of like, oh, maybe I should have just stuck it out here, but I'm also identifying that this is a part of my journey. Yeah. And I'm asking this because another thing that I think a lot of us tend to do is be so focused on the destination, and we forget to focus on the journey itself, the task at hand, the right now. We want, again, the instant gratification of like, I need just the end result. Yeah. And I'm so guilty of this. Like, I feel like I'm the most impatient person to ever exist, right? Because I know how to balance both of them, but I'm inside beating myself up of just like, can this just work? Right. Can I just have the thing? Like, I'm just ready. So while you're navigating that journey at that point in time, what's going through your mind? Is it still just kind of a daily, like, taking it day by day? I know this is a part of it. Yeah. Or are you sitting and like, are you really battling with any of those feelings of like, can I just like, I just want to get to the thing. I know why I have to do this. Yeah. But man, I know I'm, for lack of a better term, destined for these things. Yeah, I think there's a struggle there, because especially at that stage, there's no guarantee that the thing you think you're made to do is ever going to come to fruition, right? Yeah. And so I think I had a lot of anxiety about it. It's like, okay, I can grind things out. I definitely capable of doing that, but is this going to lead to the thing I want? And really not knowing that for sure. And that is scary. That's really scary. And then I think that's when the doubt starts to creep in a little bit. It's like, oh, should I have done this, X, Y? But there another path that would have accelerated, the journey. And again, just in my experience, not always, but it ends up developing. So the way that I got into the position that really was more aligned with what I had always been shooting for was because somebody had stepped down. There was this position open, and then somebody had mentioned me to the front office people, like, oh, you should consider this woman who's in Office of Regulations, and bada bing, bada boom, and then boom, you like shoot up to the front office. And so, which in Washington, the front office of these agencies is like the policy making office, the director's office. So that was random. But that's where when we get back to like core life values, it's all random. It's all a little random. You work hard, you try to put yourself in the right position, and at the end of the day, some things go your way, some don't, and you just gotta roll with it. Do you think a lot of that relates to kind of how we were talking about with being like present on the journey, doing what you need to do at that point in time, and kind of like a video game, we're collecting the things we need each level, and we're going to level up, and those tools that we got from the last one are going to help propel us forward in the next one? Because I think a lot of what at least I took away from what you just explained was that when that opportunity randomly popped up, you were prepared to take it. Exactly. It wasn't just oh, thank goodness, this is finally here. Yeah. Because on our flip side of like when we're talking about that instant gratification thing, in a hypothetical situation of anything that we could make up right now, of any position, job, field, whatever, if we were just sprung into that opportunity that we wanted on day one, we're probably not that prepared. No, right? Exactly. It's being immediately thrust into the boss level of the video game, having not even completed anything other than the tutorial, right? Yeah, exactly. We're like, I get the idea, and I can maybe fake my way through it, right? But I don't know if this is going to go well. Totally. And so that's even kind of what I'm hearing in that is the important part there is you did stick to, like what you were wanting to do. You were learning, most likely, learning the things. Oh, yeah. Like, yes, you might not be directly doing the things you want to do, but we can also identify that, hey, even though this isn't 100% of what I want, there's still maybe a valuable 5% for me right now.
Totally.
And then that can then add up to that moment presenting itself and you being able to take that opportunity.
Yeah.
So saying all that, like how long did you end up being there for?
I was there for almost 4 years. So once there was a change in administration at the beginning of 2017, I was thinking of leaving before that because, I was starting to feel, and people who work in DC and Washington, I think, get to this point a lot where you're very disconnected. I mean, it is its own place. It is not like any other city in this country. And I just got to this point where I had been there for so long. It's like, we're developing these policies and I don't even know, is this working? Is this what people want? What's happening out there? And I felt disconnected from the ground. And I had moments where I was doing more grassroots work and had that connection, but I felt like I had lost that a bit. And so I really wanted to do something that was going to allow me to, reconnect and get a sense of where are the people at, right? And what's the state of affairs. And so that's when I transitioned to work in community development. And that took me all over the country, actually, because I was working for a national organization that had offices in 40 cities, including a couple in Ohio and Cincinnati and Toledo, and started to just see deeply what was going on the ground with housing, workforce issues, and really feeling like, wow, we're hanging on by a thread here in a way that, I saw the beginning of it when I was younger. And like we were talking about, this fraying of community, this loss of resources, something fundamentally is going away. I thought it was just Columbus, but came to find out this was actually a national phenomenon, and we need to move quickly.
Now, while you were doing that, what do you feel like was the most important thing that you took away from that any of those experiences? Like, is there like one particular experience that you had where you were like, oh, this has made me understand these things in a new light, or made me realize we need to push further in this direction? Like, was there something like a big moment in that time frame?
When I was working at the community development?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, because my North Star had always been James and Livingston. And for folks who maybe aren't as closely familiar with Columbus neighborhoods, James and Livingston is an interesting area because it has always been, a pretty working class area. I think it used to be more white working class, but then Berwick, especially in the 70s and 80s post-integration, became predominantly black, which is, at one of the intersection points of James and Livingston is where Berwick starts. And what would be described now as, it's not quite inner ring suburb, but it's a residential area in a city that is a little bit beyond downtown. And in being a traditionally black middle class area in Berwick, there are a lot of neighborhoods like that have some of these patterns, that they formerly were white and then they became black, and then you start to see a school system that's going downhill, and then the neighborhoods around it suffer. Realizing for me through the travels to all these different cities that there was absolutely nothing unique about the east side of Columbus, that in fact there was an east side of Columbus in almost every major city or mid-sized city in this country, and that this is systemic. And this is systemic because of policy choices that have been made. And in some ways, we're kind of kidding ourselves if we think we're solving this through community service, though valid and important, even local government, as these problems are beyond that. These are federal issues that need national resources to have any hope of being able to distribute resources in such a way that ensure everybody gets a fair shot. And I don't think I would have felt confident in that analysis without the community development experience that took me all over the country. I still would have been a little myopic in thinking, oh, these are Columbus issues. It's like, no, it's everywhere. And we have to move ASAP to do something about that and ring the alarm.
Yeah. So was it that, or what was it that initiated the spark of, okay, I want to go down the political route? Like,
It was
that like way later?
This was all happening around the same time. Okay. And, now getting into like 2018, 2019. So yeah, I was having all of these observations through traveling to different cities, realizing this is all national, realizing we didn't have a lot of time because, to put a finer point on what's happening on the east side of Columbus, traditionally middle class area that now is one of the most dangerous parts of the city that has, an educational system that is not seeing great results, with some exception, that we have a lot of youth shootings in particular, that we have gangs, that we have dilapidated housing, that we have almost entirely food desert, though not all the way there, a lack of small independent businesses, mostly chain stores, and what is the game plan, and not hearing one. And at this point, I had the privilege to get access to all of these different areas of policymaking in Washington and watching the political scene and feeling like no one has any solutions that they're presenting. They're not even being honest about the problem. And then that paired with seeing some folks who were injecting themselves into the political process that did seem like they were being honest about what was going on and were willing to push the envelope. Seemed like they were less about careers and more about the people. And, I was still, though, in such a struggle to put myself out there as a candidate, because I had never been public on anything. I had always been the diligent staffer, staffing the person who was going to be the public entity. I had never even, beyond my local paper, school paper, the campus paper, probably had never even given a quote to press. I was never the person, right? I was always behind the scenes. And that was a struggle for me, because I just felt so inadequate. I'm like, I can't be the person, that would be so much, that would be so aggressive, that would be so different. So really having to coach myself through that and find the courage to put myself out there, even though I knew I was going to be subject to intense ridicule and critique.
Yeah. So I honestly want to dive into that a little bit, because that is probably one of the most fascinating things. Like I've never had anybody on the show with a political background. Mm-hmm. So a lot of this is like very new. And one thing that does fascinate me is that, like, okay, for lack of a better term, I'm now in the spotlight, mm-hmm. and I'm in a spotlight that somebody else really wants. And that there's also a lot of other people that think that they need the spotlight.
Yeah.
And there's, all this sort of stuff. So like, I'm going to ask just sort of a broad question.
Okay.
But like, what all goes into, or for you, what went into preparing yourself to enter into a political environment to become a politician? Mm-hmm. Because that, to me, even though I do enjoy the spotlight, like, I like being in front of a camera, I love talking to people.
You're good at it.
Thank you. Anytime I think about something like politics, though, I'm like, how do you do that? So like, what was that like for you?
Well, the first part of it was just agreeing mentally with myself that I was going to do it. And then one of the second steps that I took was writing down the why. Why are you doing this? Because I got advice that you're going to be asked incessantly, why are you doing this? And it's better to flesh that out in advance. And then some version of that becomes, what's known as your stump speech when you're campaigning. If you've ever followed a political campaign, you'll notice people start saying the same thing over and over and over again, wherever event they go to. The stump speech, you got to get that down because you want to have consistent messaging. And so, but that starts with a very detailed personal statement. And that's what I tell every candidate I talk to, or person who's thinking of running, is write down why you're doing this. And if you can't articulate that, you definitely shouldn't do it, because it's a lot. It's a lot. And if you don't have that formulated, people will see through that very quickly and you won't get anywhere. Inauthentic. We're living in an era of extreme authenticity, right? So that's what I did. And it was very therapeutic, because I actually think it was one of the first times in my adult life, or recent memory at least, that I just sat down and reflected on, why am I doing this? We described and we've chatted about some of the touch points along the way, but it isn't as if when those moments were happening, I was like, dear diary, this was an interesting development in my life and career. No, you're just go mode.
Of course.
And so to actually sit there and reflect on, at that point, the previous 36 or let's call it 30 years of this is what got me to this point was very interesting. It was an interesting exercise. I'd recommend it maybe for anyone, even if they're not going to run for political office, and it did convince me that it was the right thing to do, that I had a strong reason of why I was doing it, that I understood the theory of the case, and gave me the confidence to go for it, even though, it was extremely scary. And I was still very stressed to have to announce. Leading up to announcement day, you have the mechanics that, I don't want to bore you with of, we've got to set up the Act Blue site so you can get donations and, make sure that we have the media list of who we're going to invite to the announcement, all of those things. But beyond that, the most challenging part was just getting the core kind of worked out to be able to be strong, for the fight.
Yeah. So how much of that is a balance between, and now I might be asking you boring questions about this, but I literally just don't know. How much of that is you putting a lot of that pressure on your shoulders? Obviously, yes, you're in the spotlight. We already talked about that, but are you learning or figuring out how do I build the proper team around me? How am I what is that process like?
Yeah. Well, and I'm doing politics in a slightly different way than maybe is traditional, in that we're working outside of the system a little bit. So for sure, if you want to become a typically endorsed candidate, then this is a lot less stressful and you're not doing as much on the outside. But for me, it was, making sure we had a group of people that were going to be supportive, that were on our side, that would be discreet about what we were doing. But it was tough though to find a team because, and that's been somewhat the case for both the races I've done, because a lot of people don't want to upset the status quo. And once you are seen as more of an outside type candidate, well, then there could be reputational risk for being affiliated with it. I think that's kind of changing, but definitely in 2019, that was a strong feeling. I mean, the National Democratic Organization at that time had said they were going to blacklist any consultant that worked with a primary challenger, someone who is running against an incumbent in a Democratic primary, that if you worked as a consultant on a campaign like that, you would never get another contract from the Democratic National Campaign Committee. So that was intense. That scared people. Yeah. So that was that was a little bit of the energy in the air, was one of intimidation, retaliation. And then just looking at our local political scene in Franklin County, there was certainly a culture of retaliation, fear, people saying, you'll never be able to get another job. No, if this doesn't work out, that'll be the end of you in Franklin County. And so yeah, it was fear. And even though, as we were talking about, I've always been pretty independently minded, I have done things that more or less adhered with the expectations of what, someone who's in these educational environments that I've been in would be doing, right? I'm not becoming a rock star. It's Morgan worked at a law firm, then she worked at the federal government. It's pretty standard stuff. But this was a major bucking of expectations and really, in some ways, defying the advice that I had gotten from some mentors that I had previously in my career, who thought that this was going to be a really risky move or unnecessary. Why are you making it so difficult for yourself? You could just play the game and become the person and then get supported to do the thing. But I had made the determination that, but none of that was doing anything. We need more people who are out there who are speaking the truth and building the independent political power around that to really change the direction of this country.
What's your experience been like, even if it's up to this point, or we can pinpoint a time frame if you want, but what's your experience within all of this been like? Because again, yes, I'm asking for the show, but I'm also literally just fascinated with what that world is like. And even though if it's the main thing or adjacent to whatever it may be, I ask that in the sense of, have you sat through this experience and been okay, the deeper I get into this, the muddier the waters might get, the tougher things might, challenge me. But it continues to reignite that flame in me that's this is your why. Just keep going. Yeah. Or have there been moments of, girl, what are we doing? What's that balance been like in your experience with all of this?
Sometimes a mix of both, honestly. Mm-hmm. I mean, in terms of commitment to the issues and advancing the issues of economic opportunity, I'm more committed to that than ever, and I am fortunate that professionally I get to be engaged in doing that, even if I am not in elected office, because of my prior experience. So being able to still be connected to those who are developing policy or in elected office is great. And then helping to flesh out some of the ideas that are influencing what's happening in Washington. Like this, one thing I've been working on this fall, the Ticketmaster campaign, that we started a coalition to try to break up Ticketmaster, and Department of Justice is investigating Ticketmaster. Cool. One of the worst monopolies that was ever approved. That's great. But, I would be lying if there wasn't a piece of me that isn't, it's hard. It's hard not to win. It's hard not to be doing the thing that you want to be doing. And even if I have always had very clear eyes about the odds of the things that I'm doing, that's tough. And it's sometimes you're just like, yeah, like, what am I? What is this? I met someone at an event the other day who was very supportive. He was very supportive. He's like, I love everything you're doing. Some of my friends think you're a joke, but I really like you. And I'm like, ouch. That's kind of, but I get it. It's like, yeah, there's all the chatter out there, and sometimes that chatter can enter into your own psyche, but it's like, no, we know what we're doing. We know why we're doing it. Just stay focused. And the other really exciting thing is that there's been a lot of change that's happened. So over, my now, I suppose, approaching, well, we're past 15 years, so I guess we're on the way to 20 years in policymaking spaces. We are in a new world order of what is possible right now in Washington, getting at some of the structural problems in our economy. Some of the ideas and people that would have been seen as fringe just 5 to 10 years ago are now mainstream or approaching mainstream. And that is thrilling. And to have any part of me that is adjacent to that or involved in that is really, really cool, because that means that we're getting closer to the results, because that's all I care about is, are we going to get the results that actually solve the issues on the ground? And I was telling one of my friends the other day, in some ways I also feel fortunate that I am as excited about a person I really believe in running for an office as when I'm running myself. And we are so lucky to have a lot of solid people that are running this local election cycle that are coming up, building that base, connecting with voters. I love nothing more than seeing somebody who didn't care about politics or government and then gets that fire ignited in them, or even better put, that understanding of why all of this stuff matters, and that never leaves them. And then they start to become an advocate. So yeah, we're on the go. And I think we're at a real inflection point. And it's possible that things could get worse, but I'm optimistic that they're going to turn for the better.
So we talked about this way earlier, but I would love to revisit it now. Mm-hmm. That perfectionist mindset that you had when you were younger.
Yeah.
How much of it has stuck around, or have you found a real harmony with it?
Yeah.
Or is it just gone and you're like, I like things to be done right, but I got a handle on it.
Right.
Where's that at?
Perfectionism check-in. I've also learned, especially as I am getting a little bit, not older, but, we're advancing along here, that it's a waste of my energy. I'm being a lot more conscientious about how I'm expending my energy, because perfectionism takes a lot out of you. And then you start to realize, is this an example of a context in which I need to bring all of those skills and pathologies to bear? Or could I just take it down about 40%? And if so, take it down 40%, So it's definitely there. And but I am more judicious with how I choose to deploy it. So it's a tool.
Yeah, learning the discipline of that, right?
Yeah, I think not everything needs to be 100%.
I was definitely guilty of that for years and years. I would attach my heart and soul to every single thing that I did. Yeah. But I feel like a valuable thing that I've learned, and a lot of what you're saying, I feel like, at least that I can relate to, is that I can still give 40% of myself to something. Yeah. But I can, and this might sound weird, but I can give that 40% with 100% effort. Does that make sense? I don't have to. I think so. I don't have to attach my entire being to this thing. Yeah. I can give it what it needs. Yeah. And that, in a way, in turn, is technically the 100% that it needed for me. Totally.
And I do think a lot of the perfectionism, it's coming from a place of fear, or feeling like, if you don't, it's almost it's a cover your ass kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's like, but I gave it my all. How could they possibly critique? And it's like, they could still critique, so maybe you didn't need to always give it that much of your all, right? Yeah. And being more confident in myself and skills and all of that, I think has lessened the pressure to feel like you have to bring all of that to every task and that kind of intensity. But in the grand scheme of things, I probably still fall on the more intense side of things.
So, we're learning how to balance the perfectionism. Yes. We got it. We know how to use it. We know what tools to use it with. With that being said, and this is another broad question, but what's next? Yeah. What's on the horizon, and maybe not even in immediate future necessarily, but when you're looking ahead, what are the goals for you individually?
For me individually, well, I would love to be in an elected office, so that's definitely a goal that I maintain, and we'll just see, how the timing of all that works out. And I say that, that's the goal because the whole reason why I decided on that as a goal whenever, a while back, is it's ultimately elected officials who get to decide what the policy is. So we can do a lot of work as citizens, as advocates, trying to convince them of what the right policy decision is, but they have the power to make that decision. So that's why, that continues to be a really important role for me at some point. I hope to have that. And then otherwise, honestly, right now, my mom is almost 80. She'll turn 80 this year. So I'm really trying to prioritize spending as much time with her as possible. And not to take that for granted, because I've had so many years, as we've just walked through, where I was living in other places and traveling, trying to get all this experience, and now I do have a little bit more control and breathing room to prioritize family in that way. And so, definitely want to spend as much time with her as I can. And my fiance, he's starting his own company, and so being good support for him. Some of this stuff is mundane, but I really want to spend more time cooking. I like cooking, and you need to have some brain space to devote to that, so that's been cool. Getting back into fitness, I got so bad during the pandemic, so this has been the first time I've been able to have an exercise routine again, which is great. And then I'm bringing it back to those local elections. It's exciting. We're building political power Franklin County, throughout Ohio. That was one of the best things about this past campaign, is meeting so many people from across the state. We have a lot of great talent. When people are like, where's our bench? It's like, the bench is out there. The gatekeepers need to get out of the way and make room for the bench, but the bench is there. We have cool people of all ages who are putting themselves out there to run for office. And if I can dispense with any amount of wisdom to prevent them from having to reinvent the wheel, that's what I'm going to be devoting a lot of time to over the next several months.
I love it. Last few questions for you, and then we'll wrap this up.
Okay.
Right now,
we're getting into my bedtime.
So we will wrap up soon.
Very early.
I promise we're done soon. Looking back at your journey up to this point, for you individually, what do you feel like the biggest lesson is that you've learned?
That I can do it. I have learned so much about myself. Running for office, it almost converts you into a slightly different person. It's just a totally different skill set. But the fact that I've been able to take on all these new skills, but then from folks who have known me for a long time, they're always surprised, like, oh, but you're still exactly the same. That just means so much to me, because I believe that a lot of folks make you feel like, oh, if you're ambitious or you want to be in politics, all these things, you have to become a horrible person. And I really hope that we're starting to define this new standard, or maybe revisit an old one that existed before, of representation that comes with humanity, and these things are not mutually exclusive. So I'm very proud of that. And and just, I don't know, I don't struggle with the can I do it question anymore. Really feel like we can, and even more importantly, that if people believe, they'll back you up, and even more empowered to keep pushing.
So going off of that a little bit, I'm going to ask you purposely a very vague question. Okay. But it has some deep answers potentially, right? Yeah. But you can answer however you want. So I'm just going to ask you, what do you, and I want this to be framed as just you. Let's even set the work stuff aside, or even political stuff aside. Yeah. You as a person.
Me as a person. Yeah.
What do you want, and why?
Me as a person, what do I want and why? Whew, that is a very vague question. I do long for connection, I suppose. Similar to what you were saying. And community for me is an expression of that. I love people. I love being in relationship with people. I love building things with people, and that just brings me a lot of joy. So I don't know. I think why? That's just the root of all of it.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I was catching up with a friend a couple months ago, and I wasn't even thinking about it, but just kind of came out of my mouth. It was like, honestly, if I died tomorrow, I'd be totally fine. I would feel, I don't desire that. Hopefully it doesn't happen. I would be sad if I knew it was coming, but I really have tried to live every day like there is no guarantee of what comes after it. And for that reason, I've just lived with a lot of intention, and I feel very content in many ways.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. Final question for you.
Yes.
And then we'll wrap it up. Mm-hmm. So right now, I end every one of these episodes with the exact same question.
Okay.
So I'm throwing it your way.
Okay. I don't know what it is because I didn't watch.
You know what? We don't do detective work on this, and we don't take the deep dives in. So I ask the same question at the end of every episode. And right now, I want you to pretend like everyone in the world is listening to you speak.
Okay.
We're throwing logic out the window. It doesn't matter. Everybody can hear you. Everybody can understand you.
Okay.
So you have a live mic connected to everyone in the world, and you get to share something with them.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that you're telling them, and what do you want them to hear?
I really want people to know that they are loved. And I say that because I think so many of the reasons why we deal with all these downstream impacts and struggles and challenges is a lack of that inner peace, not to sound too guru-esque, whatever. And that there's love out there. And if you haven't found it where you currently are, then that's the mission we're all on. And hopefully in some way, for those that I touch, I can help to be a source of that. But I think that's the core.
Morgan, this was an absolute blast. I seriously cannot thank you enough for sitting down for as long as you have with me for this episode and like sharing everything that you did. Like, I really, really do appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is awesome.
So as we tell the people goodbye, not everybody around the world, but just the people that are checking this episode out, is there anything you want to leave them with? Is there anything you want them to go check out or become aware of or check in with you around social? Anything like that you want to tell people?
Follow me on social, MH for OH. I'm out there on all the platforms. Less active on Twitter these days as it deteriorates into whatever is happening on Twitter, but I'm still on Instagram and TikTok, and just would love to stay connected with folks. And in terms of things to check out, the things I think are worth checking out, I'm always posting on my social media. So
perfect. Yeah. I love it. I cannot thank you enough for giving me your time this evening. Like, this was seriously a blast of a conversation.
Really cool.
You have been on my list of guests that I wanted for a long time.
Aww,
but I honestly was like, there's no way I could get her on the show.
Oh, please.
So the fact that we made this happen, I'm so stoked. I love everything that you're doing. I love the way that you're going about it. So again, I appreciate everything that you are doing. I think a lot of people do. And in general, as this individual experience, I just appreciate you sitting down and doing this podcast.
Thank you.
So
this was really fun. Yeah, loved it. Anytime.
We did it.
We did it. We made it.
Okay, I can't thank Morgan enough for taking time out of her evening a few months back to sit with me and share everything that she did. It was an absolute blast getting to know her in this way. From admiring her and her work online to sitting with her and getting to the bottom of how it all started and why. I am very, very stoked and thankful to have welcomed Morgan into the What You Don't Hear universe here. So be sure to keep up with all that she's still doing. You can follow her at MH4OH. That is MH number 4. and keep up with everything she's out there supporting and trying to make some change for. It's, of course, all going to be linked down in the show notes. Also linked in those show notes is where you can find this show itself. We are at WYDH Pod. Toss a follow if you haven't yet. You can also follow me personally if you'd like. I am at Ross Tyson over on Instagram and kind of wherever else you want to follow me at. Subscribe and follow, though, this show on whatever platform that you check this out on, whether it's Apple, Spotify, one of those, random podcast apps that I've honestly never once heard anyone say that they use, but they somehow all exist. You can find this show on those platforms as well. Wherever it is, I would appreciate the support in whatever form you can give it. If you do want to take an extra step in that support, though, drop a rating and a review, pretty please. It does help out truly a ton. Of course, also find these episodes in video form on my personal YouTube. That is youtube.com/Ross Tyson. I would really love for you to find that subscribe button over there on my channel as well. But that will do it for this episode. I will leave you with one final reminder and thank you to our sponsors for this week's episode. If you're looking for some concerts to go to, well, Promo West Productions is bringing a lot of those your way. Visit PromoWestLive.com to find all the information you need or to find out what other shows are coming through Columbus, and then go and snag those tickets at AXS.com. And if you're looking for a place to live now or in the future, that place that I'm going to tell you to go check out is River and Rich. Live in an awesome community, an awesome art-filled area. They've got 1-bed, 2-bed, and townhouse-style apartments. Go set up a tour and check it all out by, of course, just going and visiting them in person, or get all the info you need from riverandrichcolumbus.com. And of course, a reminder that right now, if you decide to move in, you can use the code WYDHPOD for up to half off your deposit. But I thank you so much for listening. If you watch this on YouTube, thanks for looking. And I cannot overstate enough just how much I appreciate anyone ever checking out this show in any form or really anything that I do. I appreciate your support endlessly. You're wonderful, and I will catch you in the next one where I sit down with my next guest, whom you may or may not know, as they share their story that you for sure never heard.